Many of you probably wondered why German tanks of 1943-1945 were painted with a strange pattern reminiscent of ribbed cookies. After all, no country in the Second World War used such patterns. And why did the Germans start painting their tanks red towards the end of the war? Let's take it in order. The grooved patterns on the armor are not the armor itself, but a protective coating developed by the Berlin chemical company Zimmer. Zimmerit is not a paint, but a paste consisting of substances that are resistant to magnets. The Germans hoped that it would protect armored vehicles from Soviet magnetic mines. The thick layer of Zimmerit simply did not allow attaching the mine to the steel armor. What were the functions of the Zimmerit? Firstly, it is protection against magnetic mines. Zimmerit really made the car slightly vulnerable to magnetic mines. Secondly, this is camouflage. In combination with correctly selected paint, the corrugated surface of the hull significantly improved the camouflage of the tank. Thirdly, saving paint. The depressions made it possible to save on camouflage paint. What were the disadvantages of Zimmerit? First, difficulty of application. Applying Zimmerit by hand was quite difficult and time-consuming. Secondly, drying time. The paste dried and hardened for 8 whole days. Thirdly, flammability. When fired upon, the Zimmerit could ignite. But what an unexpected turn it was for the Germans. Paradoxically, the Soviet troops, against whom the Zimmerit was aimed in the first place, simply did not have magnetic mines. The Americans didn't have them either, but the Germans themselves had them, and in large quantities. German magnetic mine Panzerknacker, the German cumulative hand mine, also known as the Panzerknacker, was the infantry's last resort weapon against tanks before the advent of the Faustpatron. Probably analyzing the experience of the first years of the war on the Eastern Front, German officers planned ahead. The Red Army did not have enough anti-tank guns along the entire front line, so the Red Army soldiers were forced to make do with Molotov cocktails and bundles of grenades. Analyzing the alarming number of suicide attacks on tanks, the Nazis felt that magnetic anti-tank mines would be quite in the spirit of the Soviet Army. As a result, for 2 years, German tanks received useless but beautiful putty. The further saturation of the Allied army with anti-tank artillery and grenade launchers left the Zimmerit completely in history. Do you know why German tanks began to be painted red? Many people are familiar with photographs from the Second World War, where German tanks appear in gray paint. However, history is fraught with nuances that change our understanding of the color scheme of armored vehicles of that period. Gray, contrary to popular belief, was not universal. It was used only for equipment used in Europe. The African theater of operations required a sand color, and from 1942, on the Eastern Front, tanks were camouflaged in green and dirty brown colors, making them less noticeable against the greenery. But by the end of the war, tanks began to come out of factories, whose red tint was striking. This red armor is not the result of a military whim. In fact, these tanks were not painted in the usual sense. The red color we see in the photographs is not paint, but red lead. It was used as a primer, preparing the surface for application of the base paint. In 1944-1945, the German industrial complex was under massive onslaught of Allied bombing. Warehouses with paints and factories for their production were destroyed. By 1945, the Germans had run out of supplies of not only gunpowder, aluminum, and steel, but also regular paint. In this situation, the red lead primer became not just a preparation for painting, but also a finishing coat. Unpainted tanks covered with red lead were sent to the front, where they were destined to become part of history.